Hi, this is Pat Gahn, manager of the Ubuntu Server and OpenStack team. Here today we're doing the last day of the Ubuntu Developer Summit, June 2014, and we've got Sage and John here from the Ink Tank, or I guess you guys have been acquired, Red Hat, the Ceph team, okay, to talk about, what happened in Trust, where are we with Trusty, what are the plans for 14.10, or generally what are the plans for Ceph going forward, maybe some of the current issues. So I wanted to start with, I know that the Firefly release, when Trusty went out the door, Firefly wasn't quite GA, so when we very first released, we were on, like, I don't remember what it was. I think we were on a beta or something like that, or an RC. And so I just wanted to touch base with James and give us a quick update on where we are and how things are looking there.
Yeah, sure. So we had the agreement with the release team and the stable updates team that we could push through Firefly when it was ready, basically because we were as close as we could get to it without actually having it at release day. I think we had the .79 release in our release pocket, and we pushed the 0.80, 0.81 releases, which were the first Firefly and its point release, into stable. They landed last week, and I SIU'd a fix for the Radius Gateway over the last week as well. That landed yesterday. So Firefly is in Trusty. As usual, we're running it in our internal cloud, which we use for QA, and that seems to be hanging together so far. I know we don't use it particularly heavily, but we do use it for quite a lot of stuff. But it seems to be okay so far. But I guess the two key features that came out for that, and I know we touched on this before, but it was the tiering and the erasure encoding. I know we've got some next session on features in Firefly, so there were a number of things that sprung up. So I'll probably let Sage talk about that in a bit more detail, but I don't want to steal the next slot as well, otherwise poor John might have anything to talk about. So he's probably talked about it already.
Yeah, so I guess the main things that came out with Firefly were the tiering and erasure coding. I think the erasure coding is sort of the big exciting thing. The main thing there being that for larger clusters in particular, it's hard to justify the capital outlay for all the hard drives to do three-way replication. And erasure coding brings that down to like 1.2, 1.4, depending on what erasure coding algorithm you choose. So that's a big deal for the archival type use cases. And the tiering combined with the erasure coding lets you use the erasure code stuff for cold data in combination with things like RBD as well. And the Radius Gateway also for the S3 SWIFT compatible storage can also utilize it directly. So that's exciting. This was definitely probably our biggest release. It was delayed, as everybody probably noticed, because we wanted to sort of get the erasure coding stuff to be solid and the tiering to be solid and usable when it went out the door, which sort of put our Ceph Developer Summit schedule in a little bit of a weird place. But we're continuing to do the 3-month summits, and then the giant release, which is the next one, is just going to be 3 months later essentially. But it's all in now. I think you have 80.1 is in Trusty now, so that's good.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the version you get with Trusty. The other main thing that came out that was included there was the Radius Gateway got bucket quotas and user quotas, which was one of the more requested features on that end. And then there's a bunch of other, tons of little stuff that went in, lots of sort of preliminary work and experimental work that's sort of in progress, but not really usable just yet. But yeah, so
Sage, we have an internal server that the team uses for development, and it had to be kind of, I guess, reconfigured, right, James? And when he reset it,
very flattering to say we tore it apart and rebuilt it,
because it was not happy.
It was okay. So.
But when James rebuilt it, he put he's put Ceph in the picture. So
Yeah. So we always had Ceph in block storage, but we thought we'd go for a consolidated storage backend on the rebuild, and we just have Ceph with the Redis gateway providing the Swift services that we need.
Cool.
Which has been interesting, because you start to notice the differences between the two things. Is the honest truth. So, yeah, I mean, it's I think we've hit a couple of bugs. One which we fixed, and has been SIU'd, and some other nuances which have made it slightly awkward for our deployment. But we're working around those at the moment. So,
okay.
I think the biggest difference that we all noticed straight away was the fact that there's a global bucket namespace. So if using Swift, your buckets are per tenant, so you can all have the same bucket name. It doesn't matter. But in Redis Gateway, it's global. So when Ryan tried to create two versions of his deployment using Juju, it kind of exploded on the second one.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, that's something that we haven't quite figured out how we want to address that. The reason for that is that Redis Gateway was originally aiming for S3 API compatibility, and S3 has that sort of global view of the buckets, and Swift was added later, and so we sort of kept that model. But figuring out how to be able to switch the behavior or whatever, have that configurables. We've talked about it several times and not really done it, and surprisingly don't get that many people telling us about it.
Yeah, it's just something we noticed fairly quickly that it was a difference in behavior compared to the Swift that we've been using before. So,
yeah.
But we can, it's possible to change applications and have configuration options for bucket names. So it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing that caught us out was class CGI. We started shipping some fairly large files into our Swift storage for archiving, and immediately hit bombs with chunk transfer encoding because we're not using the patched version, we're using the vanilla distro version. So I want to talk about that for 14.10 and how we might get to a better place for a pure in distro Redis gateway. So,
and we have a plan there, so that's the good news.
Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah. So right now we're working around that by using the Civic Web embedded container. I've turned off Apache, and we're not using class CGI, and we're using the standalone container. But I wanted to talk about whether that was the strategy for you guys going forward, and kind of how that scales compared to Apache and class CGI. So interesting to chat about those things. Okay, so next thing we had on the list was System D, question mark.
That's for me.
Well, would you like to know what the plans are for 14.10?
Yes.
Okay, so we're intending on delivering a preview of System support for 14.10. So it will be possible to boot an Ubuntu server in 14.10 using System instead of Upstart is the objective. We don't think we're going to switch default. I think that's what I picked up from the session the other day.
Yeah, we had a session stage yesterday. I think it was yesterday. You should
long
watch
session.
it.
Yep. Okay.
So I think the idea is to make as much good progress as we can and have things functional for 14.10. With the ultimate goal is to have everything switched for the next LTS. So for 16.04, it will be completely System D. Right,
and I think the plan was just to switch, to start to kind of make that switch with 15.04.
Yeah, so kind of this release plus one.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
So that does mean for 14.10 we need to continue to support the Upstart approach, as well as any new System D that comes in, and it's also quite important for Trusty because Trusty will never have System D support by default as a supported option, and we'll want to continue to provide Ceph back to Trusty at least until 16.04. So,
well, this is I think the Upstart stuff is pretty complete and solid, so we haven't had to touch it really in a while. So I think that's fine, at least.
But IFA.
Yeah, so I guess the question for System D, just just making the cut at the system level, it'll just systemd will just trigger all the existing sysvinit scripts to do startup. That's sort of the migration path until there's some sort of custom glue, or is there is there actual work that needs to be done for every single package to make it work?
I think there's probably work to be done for every single package. I think if there is, Pat, I wasn't actually in the systemd session, so I'm struggling a bit now.
Okay.
I was in the other session. It was on that point in time.
Work to be done.
I think the objective is that if there's not a equivalent sys5 init script for an upstart config now, that we don't write sys5 init script, we write systemd configuration.
Right.
So we don't step back, we step forwards, rather than sideways or backwards.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think any systemd support that's coming from you guys upstream will be key to include in the packaging.
Yes.
If that's your intent for Giant, then that's cool.
That's the intent. We haven't done it yet. So we already have a sysvinit script, so I assume that initially systemd will just use our sysvinit stuff until we do the sort of proper integration and figure it out. The issue there is that the sysvinit scripts are the ones from years and years ago, and they do all sorts of crufty things that we later decided was a bad idea, and so they've got a lot of legacy sort of stuff in there. They're not very clean. The other main difference is that the upstart stuff supports having multiple clusters on the same node. So you can name your stuff cluster that's by default called Ceph, but you can have sort of OSDs participating in different clusters with different config files, and that all works in the upstart world, but it's not supported by the sysvinit stuff.
Okay.
So I think I don't think very many people actually do that, and it's documented on CLI interfaces and so forth, but not that many people. We never tell people to use it because it's sort of an unusual requirement. But it could potentially bite somebody if we don't get the systemd stuff sorted out.
Cool.
So is there going to be
we're going to have
people or a bunch of people who are doing some of this work, or
yeah,
that you're hoping that
no,
upstream is going to be?
I can see it coming from numerous sources. So Debian are obviously stepping in this direction. Ubuntu will be stepping in this direction, and I expect in the same way as we wrote upstart configurations for quite a lot of things, we'll end up writing systemd configs for those services as well.
And so our Robbie Bassick on IRC has been commenting a little bit, and so there's a question about how does one partake in the systemd, and I really do encourage folks to have I pasted the URL for the systemd presentation, and the meter has slides and kind of goes through how you do it, so it's definitely worth a watch. And I'll go into what he said. You can play with it. In 1410, Robbie pointed out instructions. You do init equals, and I think the whole path is listed. And he said, yes, every package needs to supply upstart and systemd service definition, or upstart plus initd, or just initd. And he said if there's a system5 init script and it works, then no reason to worry about systemd. Anyway, okay, Sage, you're commenting.
And I just commented, yeah. So again, the thing is that the Ceph sysvinit is just crufty and doesn't support everything. So I view this as an opportunity to do it the right way.
We do have a little bit of time, and you've got a little bit of time. So this is the cycle. I guess basically this is the cycle to play and figure it out. 1410. It's still, it's all good.
Agreed.
So I'm just going to take a brief moment to mention there's a Ceph maintainers list, which is where all the package maintainers coordinate and do all the stuff for Debian and Ubuntu and RPMs and so forth. So that might be a good place to find the people that would be possibly involved in getting this sorted out. So if anybody's interested in sending patches, we're always happy to get them.
You'll get them.
Open source. So nice that way.
Yep.
So I think that I know you guys wanted to talk about any current packaging issues or anything? And I think there was mention of calamari.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, John, I want to take just a second and tell people what calamari is.
Sure. So Calamari's the management and monitoring service that we built to sit on top of Ceph. So it talks to Ceph itself, the Mon cluster, and it also uses SaltStack to manage the servers that Ceph is running on. It's a Python application, the part that sits at the center, but it uses SaltStack, it uses Graphite, it uses Postgres, it uses Apache. So the packaging aspect of it is quite challenging. There are a lot of configs that have to go in the right place at the right time. And it also can serve packages out to the Ceph servers. So we have a slightly modified version of the Diamond statistics collector with better Ceph support. So the way we've sort of short-circuited the packaging challenge for the first couple of versions of the product before it became open source is that we actually create a Python virtual env containing a lot of the dependencies that we need. And then we sort of install that monolithically into /opt, which, as you can imagine, isn't something we're terribly proud of. The main requirement to get that packaging improved and make it fit in with upstream repositories better is actually to have the dependencies, especially the Python dependencies, be available in upstream repositories. So a lot of Python stuff is available on pypy.org in much more recent versions than it's available in distro packages. And that makes it harder for us, and that's one of the reasons we've kind of got this Frankenstein packaging mechanism at the moment. And that's something that we kind of have to have that conversation across the different platforms to try and begin the process of getting all the Python stuff we need available in packaged form so that we can have a cleaner packaging for Calamari itself.
So James, is there so John, you mentioned SaltStack, Graphite. Are those any of those? I'm
some of those
concerning.
Some of those are already packaged, but probably just need updates, I guess. There will be some gaps. I did have a quick look through the requirements prior to the meeting, and I think Diamond is nowhere. And this has that as a modified version there anyway, so we need to figure out how to do that. But I think we just need to make sure we can line up and we can agree a sensible baseline. Obviously, we do have a release every 6 months. But I guess, well, if we ship to Calamari package with 14.10, then it's only going to get 9 months of support on 14.10, so it's probably not the end of the world. And I don't know whether you guys are intending on kind of stabilizing dependencies at some point in time, so it doesn't get too insane. But it would be quite cool if, like, kind of 16.04, then we had something that we could support for a bit longer. I know that's like 18 months away yet, so.
Yeah, stabilizing dependencies is something I think we need to do. We have the Ceph Developer Summit in a couple of weeks, and I think that's going to be a topic for that as well. So I think what we're likely to see is that in the support for the existing LTS distributions, we'll probably keep our weird packaging monolithic thing. But what I'm hoping we can do is for our new open source upstream releases of Calamari, is to get that matched up with what we can get available upstream for the next releases. So for 14.10 in Ubuntu's case, and kind of meet you in the middle a little bit. So there are some dependencies we have which maybe we don't require quite such a recent version, and we need to do work on our end to get our changes upstream for the things we have modified as well. But yeah, I mean, aiming to get something in 14.10, that would be a great goal. We might need some help to make that happen in terms of the third-party dependencies.
Well, I think it would be good as soon as possible if we understand those dependencies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You agree, James? Anything else? Like, I feel like that's something we want to get a handle on ASAP.
Yeah.
Before you know it, freezes here.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
We're gonna blink and we're okay.
John, I wonder if that's just a matter of taking our sort of dependency list that we generated a month or two ago and sending it to Ceph Calamari and Ceph maintainers, just so we can sort of figure out what the gaps are.
Yeah, we should do a freshened version of that list. At the moment, we have a list of package dependencies and a list of things that we bundle, and those lists kind of probably need to be merged.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I can take the action to do that.
I mean, if I'm remembering correctly, when Dan was sort of wading through all of this, there's this. It's the Python stuff in particular that's problematic, because in the Python world, people just use PyPy and virtualenv and whatever, but at the same time, we want distro packages for, like, there was a question of whether we actually wanted to build those. Well, I guess we didn't build them themselves, but for Ubuntu, is that the strategy? To any Python module that we need, we build a distro, like a deb for? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we got some fairly big Python projects that we package. I mean,
and that's how it works.
One I'm thinking of in particular. So,
Such a no.
yeah, that one. We all know what we're talking about. But yeah, we do go. We don't. We do it through the distro packages, and for a given OpenStack release, it does. They do freeze their dependencies at a certain point in time. So sometimes we have to carry patches if we're not quite aligned, but it's not too bad.
So you guys have your developer the stuff like meet up in a couple of weeks.
2 weeks. Yep.
Okay, so it would be really awesome if we could understand the dependencies for Ubuntu before you guys head there, just to kind of set a stake in the ground, so that we can start figuring out so we can all get our head on if there's any challenges, anything we need to worry about. Cool.
Yeah. John, can we give that to you to just send an email to the respective lists, sort of with an initial pass, or at least getting the conversation started?
Yeah.
Because I think this is something that needs to be dealt with, obviously, for Ubuntu, and hopefully the Debian guys will pick some of this up, but also in the RPM world, also it needs to get sorted out. So.
Yeah, you've got to figure out.
To be honest, I'll probably try and jam it in through Debian first. So.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So we'll capture. We have blueprints. We'll add something to make sure that we've got it kind of on the list, that we don't lose sight of it.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll definitely look. We'll be waiting for info from you guys. Anything else on Calamari? And so I think for Ubuntu, what we're talking about is like a 14.10 going forward story is what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Because I don't think what we're talking about is anything that could go into the LTS, definitely.
No, yes, it's not.
So.
Yeah. I mean, we'll continue to do the Firefly point releases in Trusty, obviously, but beyond that, I don't think anything's worth pulling back. Sorry, just going back for a second, John, on the actual the GUI front end piece of Calamari, is that, I seem to remember that was sort of a weird thing too. Like it's
So
how that gets packaged up.
I was having a similar conversation about RPMs just the other day. There's an easy way and a hard way of dealing with it.
I felt easy. Sorry, I just.
The hard way is that there is this whole set of build dependencies for the JavaScript side that include things like having a Node.js environment, installing dependencies using the Node package manager. It has its own build tool. It's basically its own little world of packaging and so on. And you could potentially have the right build dependencies on everything and script that build so that you could have a source package and so on. But the easy way to do it is to treat the GUI code as an upstream project that releases a tarball of the built JavaScript, and treat that as a static resource. Opinions differ on whether that's a clean thing to do. But compared with having a whole node package manager build environment, I think it's definitely the easy thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I probably can't get back into deving. But I think we might be able to be quite creative for Ubuntu. So we have another thing that works very similarly to that, which is the Juju GUI. So the GUI for Juju is I don't know, does some load thing during its build process, and they produce an artifact that's actually the code base. We don't actually push that through distro at all. That's entirely Charm deployed and Charm managed, and I'm just wondering whether that might be a slightly neater approach to the front end, rather than trying to get something that doesn't really fit distro into distro. Is whether having a nicer way of installing it like that might work quite well. So, don't know. Something we can look at. We can definitely pull some expertise in from the guys who did that work. So.
I'm not very Juju literate.
Well, I was going to say, speaking of Juju, what about a charm?
Well, I think that ultimately, yeah, that would be pretty cool. Having the ability to deploy Calamari as part of a Ceph deployment and then have it manage your deployment for you would be pretty awesome. So.
Yep.
So who would do that? And are we talking 14.10 that we would have something like that?
I think we could take that as a stretch for 14.10. See how it goes. See if we get time. See how we get on with the rest of it first. So, yeah, I'm less worried about the back end. I think that will probably go in relatively painlessly into the distro, but the front end sounds like it could be challenging. Which is kind of how we deal with Juju, because Juju ends up in the distro and the Juju GUI doesn't.
So how does that work? Does it when you have that charm? Is it a charm for installing the GUI for Juju? Did I get that right?
That's right. So if you like Juju deploy Juju GUI, and it pulls its release artifact from somewhere on Launchpad. I'm vague because I don't know the specific details. But that's I can't show my ignorance of web development here completely. It's like a HTML5 Ajaxy. If you go to jujucharms.com, that's basically the Juju GUI. So.
Well, I feel like you guys are talking about like pulling down this tarball and scripting this and doing this, and I think from a user perspective, you can use the charm to kind of abstract that away. They don't have to worry about where the tarball is coming from. They don't have to worry about all this sort of stuff. It's just it's a cute little icon.
So is the charm doing the build locally, or is it pulling down something which is already built and we're just kind of using it?
We make the charms do what we want it to do. Yeah. The charms are very flexible. You write them on whatever language. And actually, John, there's a whole bunch of sessions on charms and doing that. But our main goal on the Ubuntu server and OpenStack team is to make sure that things we care about are charmed. But it just makes it. It's almost like I almost think of it as kind of almost like a script, an install script to get it all set up. And so, but from a user, it's just it should be super easy. And yeah, like we said, you can either pull the tarball, you can build it. It's very flexible in what's happening behind the scenes. Okay,
there might be some usefulness there for things like setting up a database on the Calamari server as well. I don't know how Debian maintainers feel about having packages that do things like create users in PostgreSQL and that kind of thing. So that might also be stuff that needs to go.
That's probably a good place for their charm again.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we can talk more about that.
But there are ways of doing that in packaging as well. So.
Yeah, but so I think step one is we need to get Calamari and all the package dependencies kind of sorted. And then, like James said, a stretch goal for this cycle would be to charm it. And charms are not necessarily tied to the release anyway. So we've got a little bit more flexibility there. But I think it's something to start working to and to be mindful of. All right, anything else on Calamari? So I think next, are there any other like current issues or anything else like that, or can we move on to talk about what you guys are doing? I think in Giant, is what it's called.
Giant, yeah, I can do that next. Sure. So um, normally, or what we've been doing is there's a sort of regular cadence of major releases from Ceph that are, alphabetically named like everything else. So Firefly Giant is the next one for giant squid, um, and because Firefly was delayed, Giant is probably like 2 or 3 months out. We're probably going to switch to more of like a 4 month cadence, maybe, or I don't know. We're talking about it. We'll figure it out at the next summit. So there are a bunch of different sort of themes, I guess, of avenues of work sort of that we're working on for Giant. So there's sort of ongoing work to improve the stuff that's in Firefly. So we added this cache steering functionality, but there's sort of ongoing work to improve the performance and stability and just make sure that that works well, and also spend some time deploying it in sort of real environments and learn about how to best use it, when it's going to help and when it's not going to help. So that's ongoing work. On the erasure coding side, we have basic erasure coding support. There's a plugin interface in Ceph that lets you plug in different sort of libraries on the back end that actually do the erasure coding arithmetic to make things work. So right now we're using jerasure and gfcomplete, which are sort of very fast libraries from a fellow, James Plank, who they just go really fast and they work really well. And so it's like Reed Solomon and Galois fields and like pretty much everything you want you can sort of choose. We have sort of a sensible default. But the main thing coming in Giant in that space is the addition of local recovery codes. This is driven by work by Loic Dackery. So the idea of a local recovery code is that you spend a little bit of extra storage to add a couple different additional blocks of redundancy, but then it means that when you lose a block, when you lose a disk, instead of having to reread all 12 or 14 different pieces to regenerate that one block, you can load just a subset of those. So you maybe only have to read 5 blocks in order to recover that one block. But then if you lose 2, then you have to read the whole thing. But the basic idea is that it makes recovery cheaper when you lose a disk by trading a little bit of extra storage. And there's a paper that came out of Facebook a couple of years ago that showed that this was really important for their huge Hadoop clusters where they're using erasure coding stuff. So that's exciting. It's going to come out. It's going to be flexible in terms of how you map it onto crush rules. So you could, for example, have a crazy crush rule where you have like 3 data centers and you map the local recovery blocks or whatever, so that if you lose a disk in one data center, it recovers just from that data center. And if you lose multiple, then you have to sort of pull things across.
So Sage, can you tell me what is crush rule?
Crush. So crush is the data distribution.
Oh, crush. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, right.
That's okay.
That's the data. That's how you define. You want to replicate across racks or rows or whatever it is. Yeah. So anyway, all this. The local recovery stuff is going to be pretty neat. So that's coming in Giant. It should be merged probably in the next week or 2, actually. The other sort of major avenue is just improving Rados performance. So we're doing a lot of work to make Ceph go fast on sort of high-end storage backends. So if you're backing your cluster by flash, we're trying to get the IOPS way up. So that's stuff on the client side with improving threading and work queuing and so forth, so that there are fewer context switches. And there's also work adding a bunch of tracing points inside the code so we can better understand what the behavior is and figure out how to fix it using like system tap or LTTNG. So a bunch of work going on there. Too exciting. On the network side, there's in-progress work by the folks at Mellanox to add RDMA support to Ceph. This is based on their Xelio, libxio library that's open source and sort of hides a lot of the nitty-gritty details of doing the low-level InfiniBand APIs, IB verbs, and so forth into a much easier-to-consume interface, and then that abstracts away a lot of the corrupty details and gives you something that's much easier to write something that works well on top of, and then plugging that into the Ceph messenger abstraction. So these guys spoke at the Ceph Day a couple days ago in Boston, and so that works ongoing, and hopefully at least some of it will make it into Giant. There's sort of it can sort of snowball into lots of different other stuff, so we'll see how far. Some of it's probably going to come in Hammer too, but there's work there basically to make the network stuff also faster and more efficient. The other general area is looking at alternative backends for the OSDs. So today the Ceph OSDs are storing objects as files. They use LevelDB for some metadata. They have a journal for atomicity and safety and so forth. And normally it's all in XFS. But there's some alternative backends that put everything in LevelDB from the guys at United Stack. my wing is doing a lot of work there. And then there's a patch that hopefully can emerge this week that lets you swap in RocksDB instead of LevelDB, so you can choose what your sort of key value database is. There's some prototype work done with the Seagate Kinetic drives to sort of glue the key value stuff on top of those drives, which is kind of interesting. And then there's the possibility of using the F2FS file system from Samsung. It's like a journaling file system for Linux that sort of is optimized for SSDs. And if that goes well, then there's also the possibility of on SSDs eliminating the journal entirely, which would be kind of cool. So lots of sort of refactoring and cleanup and fixing the APIs and so forth to make it easier to sort of plug in these alternative backends for stuff that's going on. There's a general push to get the sort of remaining items preventing people from using CephFS in production sorted out. So we're sort of trying to narrow down like a specific use case that we can do all our testing around and improving debugging tools and so forth, so that people can start using the CephFS distributed file system.
What do you think is preventing? What's preventing folks from using it in production?
I think it's really just the amount of QA that we're doing and having confidence to be able to tell people, go run this, and we don't expect you to come back crying.
Right, yeah, people cry when they lose the data. Yeah.
Yes, and we don't like that. Yeah, so I think largely it's a QA thing. There are a few sort of structural things, and then there's also making sure that we have the tools so that if something does go wrong, we can sort of inspect the underlying data structures, figure out what happened, and have some chance of repairing it too. And I'm
going to ask one more question on Ceph. So why would I use CephFS? What?
Because you need a file system, right? So most people today are using Ceph for object and block, but lots of people, the vast majority of applications in the world are written for a file system, and having that shared across multiple nodes is hugely useful. Even if you just look at what the sort of scale-out storage requirements are, a huge portion of those are all, they're storing files. You want to replace your NetApp filers and your EMC whatever's, your Isilon box or whatever, with something that's open and scales better. And that's really the promise of CephFS. So the big thing that is sort of lacking right now is, well, aside from just general QA and having some confidence, is sort of a proper FS check, so that if something does go wrong, it'll go and fix it for you. And so we're working on how to sort of get there. Yeah. So there's that. There's Calamari, of course, which we recently open sourced. We're very excited about. There's lots of work to do there because most of the efforts around getting that into users' hands were around sort of building the sort of simplified installation thing that you'd give to customers, that were lacking packages and so forth. So we just talked about that. For the block device, RBD, which is what everyone's using for their OpenStack clouds, there's some general performance work, just cleaning things up and making it go faster. There's lots of optimizations we can do to reduce the number of IOs, essentially that's doing on the back end. There's been a bunch of improvements on the kernel client to improve stability and add support for some newer features that we added on the user space side but didn't add in the kernel. So probably, I don't know, we should probably have a separate thread at some point to make sure that the fixes that we're sending upstream are getting backported to whatever the trusty kernel is, because I think it's different than the kernel.org stable kernel. What trusty used, right? What is trusty on?
313.
313.
But then there'll be the hard. I mean, yeah, we should definitely have discussions. I mean, the kernel will. There will be newer kernels available through the hardware enablement kernel too.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but
okay.
We should connect you with the kernel guys.
Yeah. So we try to make sure that the stuff that are fixes are tagged with the stable tag so that they get sucked up into the kernel.org stable trees. But that's 3.14 and 3.12 and 3.10 or whatever, so not what Trusty used, unfortunately. But I think mostly, from what I've seen, the Ubuntu kernel team does a pretty good job of taking everything that's going into those trees and they put it in the long-term tree that they're maintaining too. So that probably isn't too much of an issue. This probably isn't giant, but possibly Hammer. We want to look at making the Redis block device have a sort of asynchronous replication to a remote cluster. So you can do disaster recovery or operator error recovery, and so forth. So you can have all the IOs essentially for a block device being journaled and then streamed asynchronously to somewhere on the other side of the planet. So if you lose a data center or somebody corrupts the image or something, you can rewind and get your whatever happened a minute ago or a day ago. So that's we're going to talk about it at the developer summit coming up next week or the week after next.
So I have a question for you, Sage, on that one. Do we need? So should someone from Ubuntu be there?
For the developer summit?
Yeah.
I
mean, we're not developing.
Yes, so probably yes and no. Usually there are a few sessions that are about things like packaging and getting stuff into end users' hands and so forth. So I would look at the schedule once it's published, probably late next week, and see which sessions make sense.
See if it makes sense. Okay.
So if we're talking about calamari packaging, for instance, then yes, you should definitely be there. And
there's normally a general deployment session as well, isn't there?
Yeah.
So, which I singularly failed to attend for at least the last 3 summits.
Now, where is it?
It's the same as this. It's all Google Hangouts and
oh, okay.
Oh,
excellent.
YouTube
Because I was looking here, I'm like, I don't see a location that explains it.
It's the same format. Yep.
Understood.
Yep. And the last thing is Rados Gateway, which is probably a nice segue into what the next topic anyway. So the goal is to standardize on using the CivicWeb backend instead of the mod fastCGI Apache backend, because that avoids all the complexities and all the annoying crap we had to do to modify fastCGI and Apache to get it all to work properly, and sort of sidesteps all of the packaging issues that come out of that. So CivicWeb is a really simple embedded web server written in C++ that is now compiled directly into the Rados Gateway. So if you pass it a config option, it will just run as a standalone daemon and listen on port 80 or whatever you specify. So that also makes deployment way easier. One of the sort of more frustrating things for users setting up Ceph is getting all the Rados Gateway stuff to work because there's so many moving parts.
What do you think, Dave? Did you agree with that? Was it hard?
No, it's far easier. So, it's just I mean, I turned off Apache and put one line of config into ceph.conf, and it was working. So.
Now I do want to say if James says it's easy, it doesn't necessarily mean it's easy. But yeah.
Easier, yeah.
It is much easier. So.
Yeah. So the goal is to make that the default, basically. So I mean, the one sort of downside there is that when it's all going through Apache, you have sort of the entire tool chain associated with all the existing Apache modules and functionality that you can sort of layer into your web stack, whatever available to you, whether it's I don't even know what people do, whatever, like rewrite rules or like caching or whatever, I don't know. So you can't do that because it's sort of a simple embedded web server. It doesn't as featureful. Like I'm not even sure if it does SSL. Like you probably want to do that a layer in front of it in your HA proxy layer or something like that. But who knows?
Yeah, better get that version of HA proxy that supports that into
yeah. But it does simplify things. Yeah. So the main thing that happened.
Is there any reason why you couldn't do some of that stuff via Apache still and use something like mod proxy to proxy back to CivicWeb, and that then still avoids fastCGI? I know that does
possibly
most of the things, like chunk transfer encoding is supported by that module, so
yeah.
It might work.
Or I mean, another possibility is to write in a native Apache module that sort of wires Rados Gateway directly into Apache. I can't remember if we actually did a prototype of that or not. I forget, I have to ask you who to. So these are all sort of things we look at, and for reasons I don't entirely remember, CivicWeb was sort of the simplest, and that's what we settled on for now. But there are definitely things that other people can play with too. So the way that internally Rados Gateway has sort of a modular abstraction of what the front end is. So the fastCGI front end, the CivicWeb front end. There's one that just generates load internally that's used for benchmarking purposes. So you could easily imagine one that sort of glues into the Apache module framework or anything else. yeah, so I guess the main thing that's we actually have to do there is basically just make sure that all our QA automated testing stuff is actually testing the web front end, because right now it isn't. So I'd be curious in seeing if you've had any problems, or hearing if you had any problems, James. Using that in your environment.
Yeah. Also, yes, we're having a few issues.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think Ryan, who's on the Hangout, has had more pain than I have, definitely. So for the basic use that we have, which is basically some storage for Juju, it's fine. Ryan's doing some work with more kind of archive-based storing into Swift, and I know you've had some problems with. I'm gonna say content types being funny, but we haven't looked at it in detail yet.
Okay.
I think we're still investigation, but Ryan, you want to?
Yeah, we had, I guess, three things that we ran into. We mentioned one earlier, which was the I guess the global namespace for the buckets. So that kind of ran into, we had deployed in 2 different tenants and came up in one and the other one, and just wasn't working until we found that out and cleaned it up. The second was, I think, the fast CGI, or one of those ones. We got that resolved. And then in our Swift client that we're using, we're just using a Python Swift client, but we were doing a put object, and just real simple, the object and the path and the content, and that was it. And when we would go and that was falling apart because we weren't passing content length as a parameter to the put object. So I've seen a number of patches upstream, even in I guess this Swift client will do that now, like the latest one or whatever. But that one got hit. It's easy enough. It was just that was being picked up or implemented or somewhere stuffed and determined before. And then the other one we've seen, which it's kind of hard to reproduce even with a simpler version of the client, but the content type is not necessarily being interpreted appropriately. So we would put an object in, and then we would list the container, and we would look at the list of objects that came back. Some of them had content type set, some of them didn't at all. But if you statted, for example, you would get the actual content type associated with it, but in the list object return, it wasn't there. So just little quirks, subtle differences.
Cool. Okay.
With our simple client, just kind of tripped over it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess obviously the main thing is just make sure that those get reported upstream in the Ceph tracker on the mailing list, so that we can make sure they all get squashed out. So I suspect a lot of this stuff is going to fall out once we just start running this through our QA. So that's sort of
Well,
the
I think
next step.
I mean so Ryan is the lead developer on Oil. So I guess my point is we're also doing some Ceph QA work. It's getting run through our environment too.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Cool. Okay.
All right. So is that about? I mean, it's perfect time to be done because we just have a couple more minutes, and I know that John's going. We've got another Ceph session right after this, and James will actually set up the Hangout. So we probably could use a minute to work out his kinks. Getting that set up.
I don't know what you're saying. I'm not
I look forward to helping James with something. It's going to feel good. So it's going to be awesome. Let me see. And I don't think there's any questions. I think Andy Whitcroft pointed out that the kernel team, the Ubuntu kernel team, is maintaining a 3.13 kernel as well. So just kind of a follow-up from the earlier discussion.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Saw that.
Anyway, thank you so much, Sage, for joining us, and thank you, John. And we'll talk to you guys again in, I think, about 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Good to be here.
I'll ping you the URL once we've got it running.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, you guys. Bye.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.